Yeah, because obviously the red pill.
Yeah, I know from the Matrix.
From the Matrix, but I'm only really a lot of this stuff I'm only tangentially aware of just because of like the stuff that I listen to talks about why that stuff is bad. Essentially, like all of this stuff, like even Charlie Kirk, like it's like all of these right wing influencers or whatever. It's like they only pop up because of the stuff that I listen to going against them. But it's like these red pill people, from what I know, they're generally like against like anything that's woke. You know, like it's like there's for example, there's some of these like they're movie critics, right? But then they're like, oh God, they're going woke because they have a female lead in a movie or a black lead in a movie, or they changed the character to like some kind of racial minority just because of like woke stuff. So there's that aspect of it. It's like, you know, what's wrong with being a man? Why can't you just, you know? So there's like the woke aspect of it. There's also just like the other part about it that is like, you know, all women want. Well, they say women are delusional because they all want some guy who's like 6'2", makes $1 million a year and whatever, right? Is physically fit, you know. That's all that women want. And
that almost sounds like the incel complaint.
Well, yeah, they are. Red pills and incels are basically the same thing. And from what I understand, obviously I'm neither one, but
well, yeah. I just while you were talking, I said, okay, neither one of us really know what it is because we're not a part of that. So right. I just did a quick Google search and it's rejecting the mainstream narrative. So, you know, don't be a sheep, I guess, is part of it. Apparently, it refers to an individual who believes they have discovered hidden political biases or perceived truths, particularly concerning the media and societal structures. So that anti-woke thing falls right into that. Anti-mainstream ideology, okay. Skeptical outlook toward the mainstream media fits. Association with the manosphere, that's a good one. A collection of communities promoting ideas of male supremacy, anti-feminism, and the belief that society disadvantages men. Okay. It says the red pill metaphor is frequently used in far right and white supremacist circles to describe a worldview, back to worldviews again, of awakened conspiracy theories that often incorporate male supremacist and misogynistic ideas. And, those who identify as red-pilled see themselves as intellectually superior to those who accept the mainstream narrative, who they call the blue pill. Okay, got it. All right, so...
So I guess, like, one of the reasons why I think I never went down that path, you know, is like you said, you taught me well. Also, it's not really like my lived experience, you know, like I've always been, I mean, granted, I am 6 feet tall. I'm in fairly decent shape. I mean, I'm not athletic, but I'm also not overweight. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm fairly handsome, but anyways, my point being is I've never been rich, but I've also never had a problem getting women either. So this whole idea, that part of that idea that like, women just want money and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I've never had money and I've still been able to like get women. That's part of it. And plus all of that far right, like, it's just never really been my thing either. So,
well, I guess that might be part of the question. Well, because in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk's murder, one of the things that when we were forced to confront it, you know, because it was dominating both of our news feeds, so we felt like we had to talk about it a little bit. And I said during that bit of the conversation that it would be interesting to kind of use the Lippmann Bernays public relations propaganda model to kind of watch how the stories would form. And sure enough, here we are. What is it? 2-3 weeks later, and
like 3 weeks. Yeah.
3 weeks later, and there's several different narratives that are now out there trying to gain traction, and you can kind of watch to see who's feeding off of who in that model, like within the podcast, YouTube, space. You can see, this group over here is running with Ukraine did it. It wasn't Tyler Robinson. It was a conspiracy involving Ukraine and some geopolitical thing. And then there's another group that's picked up the story that no, it's Israel, because Charlie Kirk was starting to question, the Christian rights, fealty to Israel given the situation in Gaza. So Israel had him killed. And then somebody else has got, no, it was an inside job. And and all of these stories are floating around, and it'll take, who knows which one will eventually gain traction. Meanwhile, a lot of the progressive left YouTubers and podcasters and that are going, no, we can't whitewash his legacy. We have to point out, all what he really said and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, meanwhile, even those guys are starting to drop it because the news cycle has moved on, right? Yeah, it was 3 weeks ago. We've had all kinds of stuff, ICE raids, court decisions,
it's a lot of stuff, and I also, there's part of me is like I almost feel like we just put too much into that specifically. Too much. I don't know, like
too much attention on the Charlie Kirk thing, or just the noise coming out of the machine, so to speak.
The noise coming out of the machine specifically related to Charlie Kirk, I think, because I get it. He was a very popular and somewhat influential in his sphere. Mm-hmm. And it was obviously gun violence is always bad, but it's just like so much stuff happens that like.
Well, into that, where there was all this intense focus on that. Obviously, he's a popular public figure, right? Controversial, but out there in the public eye, and boom, taken out. But we're less than 300 days into 2025. And the last time I checked, there were over 324 mass shootings.
I think that stat right there, is part of the reason why I almost feel like we're giving too much attention to just this one
person. And the other thing that, it's sort of, are we recording? Should we introduce ourselves?
Yeah. What's up? Welcome back. It's episode 13 of Occasionally Philosophical, father and son conversation where we talk about worldview, just whatever.
And how we maintain our sanity.
Yeah. So once again, I'm Mark.
And I'm Doug.
And what were you saying?
Well, we were talking about the red pill and the alt-right pipeline and all this kind of stuff, and how in the 3 weeks or so since the murder of Charlie Kirk, these various conspiracy theories have kind of popped up as to what actually happened. And there's the group over there on we'll call it the progressive left YouTube podcast sphere that are some that are trying to say, hey, we're not celebrating that he's dead, but let's not whitewash, his rather unpopular opinions. We touched on the empathy versus sympathy because in our minds it was the least controversial of the controversial positions that he held. But all that aside, it turns out that, I had mentioned that one of the things that I was looking at because of my just general distaste for guns and the fact that I thought that when the Sandy Hook thing happened and somebody got into a school and shot up kids that we would do something, but we haven't. Now It's just, now kids are getting shot. There was, what prompted was the thing in Minnesota, but then there's even been more since then. And then I got, and I was trying to use like the AI tools because, there's a lot of information and supposedly these AI tools are good for condensing it. So I collected I went to a couple of different sites that track gun violence and I put the links into that Notebook LM. Right, because that's supposedly a good thing to sort through. And I typed in a couple of questions, and it was like I can't. I'm like, oh god. So I'm kind of stuck on that project as far as like compiling my data. But one of the things is like even the definition of a mass shooting is that 4 or more people get shot. They don't have to die, but it has to be a minimum of 4. So what about all the shootings where only 2 people died?
Yeah.
Or,
or one person
or whatever, and so there's that underreporting. And then you look at the homicides where there's over like 27,000 gun homicides. And then you throw on top of that the self-murder.
Right.
And that's another 20-some thousand. Yeah. So it's like, and then I think, all right, if you just leave the mass, like the mass shootings out, and you just take, say, 40,000. I know the numbers are over 20 that I saw. And you say 40,000 people every year are dying either via homicide or suicide. And that's a small town. It's a medium-sized town, actually. A lot of those small towns that are supposedly the real America have like 10,000 people. So you're talking about wiping out a small town every year. Just gone.
Right.
And all we can ever come up with is thoughts and prayers, right? And the solutions seem to be in defending, like turning the schools into prisons almost. Metal detectors and locked guards and police roaming around and all this kind of stuff. Instead of maybe focusing on what are the social conditions
Right.
that are creating people that are so frustrated, so angry, so at the world, just that they go into their gun safe, grab their stuff, and then it's not even that they're targeting someone. Like, okay, I'm really mad at the mayor of my town because my town is just messed up. So I'm going to go. No, they just go and in some random public place and just gun down a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And then they kill themselves. So you can't even ask them, well, why that random group of people? Why did you, now sometimes it's obvious, like when they go into a Walmart that is, 95% black shoppers, and it's a white guy that goes in with a gun and starts shooting. You can pretty much guess what his motivation was.
Right.
But the guy in Minnesota that shot up that church?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. But people are being radicalized somehow.
Well, yeah, and it's a lot to unpack. I mean, all the socio-economical various, and I find it funny you said the prison or make schools like prisons. It kind of reminded me of there was a part in the Arrogant Ape which we've been talking about, where she talks about the guess if this is a prison or a school, and she's like, it's actually surprisingly hard when you just look at photos of a prison versus photos of schools, and like she's like, you basically have like
that was in the chapter on the Great Unlearning.
I think so. Where it basically she's like, you have like, it's basically guess, you can't, there's no way to tell.
I was just reading over that yesterday, actually, 'cause I said I was rereading the book, going through it more slowly, and I'm right now it like sits on the table, and I'll pick it up and I'll just flip it open at random. I'm not like reading it straight through again.
Yeah.
Like grabbing different things. But I did see that, and apparently the website is still up, that you can still do it. And I think, as I recall, she said her performance on that was no better than chance.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like flip a coin.
Right. And then that gets into, there's people that argue about the school to prison pipeline, and, there's how, I've seen different people argue different ways, but like, some people say school is pretty much just there to teach us to be good workers, but back to the, I've been very, very angry in my life, about various things, whether it's because I'm broke or because whatever, somebody hurt me, somebody did something to me. But like, there's something going on to where you're like so angry that you're gonna get, or so whatever the emotion is. Maybe it's not anger, I'm not sure. Maybe it's despair or something different. But that you would just go shoot random people. I want to say I don't condone killing of anybody, but it's almost like I could almost rationalize it if it's something somebody specific did to you. Like if you wronged me in some kind of way, I could almost but like to just go into a church or a bar or wherever and just randomly shoot is just, I can't really like wrap my mind around that. And then you have the argument, well, it's not the guns, it's the people. And then I saw somebody said, yeah, exactly. It's not the guns, it is the people. So we should stop people from having guns.
Well, I think it's sort of, it's the same way that, when you and I talk about like pro-life or the abortion debate, and I'm like, yeah, I agree with the people that are anti-abortion, that I would love to live in a world where no embryo was ever aborted. I would love to live in that world. However, I would prefer that no woman ever got pregnant when she didn't want to. And whatever we need to do to create that world, right? Like what social circumstances do we need to create? What emotional support do we need to give to both men and women so they're not out there having sex indiscriminately with babies coming out, right? Either birth, like combinations of birth control, emotional regulation, so you're not using sex to avoid, something else. All those kind of things. And then no abortions. Everybody's happy, right? Instead of this, well, people get pregnant when they don't want to for various reasons. And there's accidental pregnancies. I mean, people have used condoms and gotten pregnant, and people have been on birth control, taken the pill and gotten pregnant. And so if you've taken all the necessary precautions to avoid getting pregnant and somehow or another biology gets around, and then I think that freedom, the ability to choose what's best for you, what's a meaningful life to me means that I'm either financially unable to provide what this child actually needs to thrive. Yeah, I could keep it alive, but it's not going to thrive. And that's not good, right? Because now I'm possibly putting someone out there who's not quite solid, right? And you know, I mean, given the fact that I had some unresolved traumas from my own childhood, you know, bringing you into the world when I did probably wasn't, you know, would have been cautioned against had, you know, my older self now been talking to my younger self. You know, I might have said, handle your stuff, you know, deal with but I didn't know. But I did know that when your mother she had an IUD, an intrauterine device, so there was no way she was going to get pregnant. So after we had been married about a year, we were talking about it, and it was like, yeah, I wanted to bring a child into this world. And so she went in and she had the IUD, and within a couple of weeks, I guess I was fertile, but whatever, she was pregnant. And then you came into the world. And while you were still hanging out inside your mom, I made you a promise that, you know, there was one thing that you would never know. You would never know whether or not you were loved. Right. And that was a promise that I kept. Now, everything else, you know, I made, you know, I mean, we can sit there and we can catalog the number of mistakes that I made along the way.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I think that, you know, when we talk about, you know, because I was thinking about a couple of these progressive left guys that I've seen in recent weeks, and they've been talking about that alt-right pipeline, how these young men are getting drawn into that, right? And I started thinking, well, what is it that's causing that? You know, I mean, you didn't get sucked into that.
Yeah, part of it, I guess, is because, like you said, I mean, you always told me you love me, so I never had that problem. And that's the thing, like, I did a little search myself about how do people get red pilled, and it says that here the entry points, it often begins with non-extreme or seemingly apolitical content like self-improvement or fitness channels, like how to be more confident or how to attract women, right? And like, once again, like I said, I've never really had that problem attracting women.
Not that I recall.
You know, it wasn't like, you know, I've never read these like books or I never like looked into those YouTube channels like, oh, how do you get girls, you know, or how do you get women, or how do you get women to sleep with you or whatever. And I've also, like, other than like playing sports in high school and maintaining a fairly decent physique in my life, I've never really been a fitness nut. Like, I don't go to the gym really, you know, I do push-ups and stuff like that, but I'm not really like. Also, the other thing it says here is the anti-wokeness stuff, making jokes about wokeness. I've never found that stuff funny. You know, I don't know. I grew up in Southern California with a lot of different, you know, exposure to various different groups of people besides white people. So, you know, seeing, because a lot of times with these anti-woke YouTubers that, you know, whether they're talking about video games or movies or whatever, it's always like, oh God, they're making this Little Mermaid is black or whatever, or I don't know why that's the only one I could think of right now, but there's more, you know. But it's like, oh God, you're changing history. And first of all, Little Mermaid, actually, the original Little Mermaid was way worse than the Disney version that we know. The actual original, like fairy tale or whatever. But anyways, point being is that seeing representation of other people that actually live in this country has never been like a source of pain for me, like it seems to be for other white men. Actually, it's not even white men, because some of these men are not. They're not all white that are. These red pill men. They're not. They're mostly white, but they're not all white.
One of the things that bothers me a lot is this idea of what makes a man. And I mean, if you go to like the current affairs section and that, there are these, it's just toxic masculinity. It's being dominant and this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know, where does that idea like really come from? Now, I grant you that in my own experience, because of the situation that I had to grow up in, and the fact that in order for me to survive at home, in with some sort of psychological health, I had to actively suppress the typical boy-like behaviors, right? Because anytime I did anything that was typically like a boy, what I heard from my mother was, "You're just like your father." And as soon as I heard that, I knew it was all over for me. I was in deep shit. So I actively pushed that away. And so then now I'm out in the world, and I have to behave in the way that I'm expected to behave as a male in the society. But at the same time, I'm aware of the fact that a lot of these behaviors are displeasing to women.
Yeah.
Right? At least to the women that I had to live with, 3 sisters and a mother. Right? And so then trying to navigate that path forward. And so when I started like asking questions about this, this toxic masculinity, and the fact that it seems like the progressive left can't hold on to men. I mean, just your standard cisgendered male, white, black, brown, whatever. They're having a hard time with that because they reject the standard definition of masculinity, right? This domineering, controlling, beast or whatever, but yet they don't have a vision to replace it with.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think, I mean, definitely it's like it seems like, and maybe it's just because I'm also a slave to the algorithm, but it's like there's like toxic masculinity, and then, which I think toxic masculinity, at least the way I see it, is it's taking those masculine traits that we all recognize to the extreme.
mm-hmm.
It's not that it's bad to be strong or to be, what else? Strength, courage, independence, disciplines, stoicism, leadership, protection, providing. Like, they're not in and of themselves bad qualities, right? But when that strength turns into dominance, when that discipline turns to abuse, or leadership is just your whatever. I can't think of a bad, or you're leading down the wrong path, or something.
Well, there's leadership that inspires people to follow you, and then there's leadership that,
like, out of fear.
Yeah. And if you can inspire people to follow you by your example, right, then they're going to try to emulate those qualities that you have, right? And unfortunately, you can pick a bad example, right? And I think a lot of what's happened is that as the old John Wayne sort of idea of what a man is has been stripped away, right? That, yeah, the rugged outdoorsman, kind of thing. There's a sort of a mythic pull to that, I guess. But at the same time, the voices that particular image had crushed, right? The indigenous voices, the women, the minorities that had been excluded out of that, those voices start coming up and start saying, well, yeah, some of those things are good, but there's a lot that's attached to that that's not so good. And there's a reaction, right? And it's sort of, in my mind, like the toxic masculinity is a reaction against that. It's saying, well, if these things are good, then more of them would be better, right? Like if strength is good, then being really strong is got to be better. And it's like,
right.
Then somehow or another, we always keep circling back to Aristotle, but Aristotle was the golden mean. Like the place between the two extremes is where you want to try to be, and that's the whole cultivation of virtue, personal virtue.
Yeah,
being able to know when it's time to like be assertive and when it's time to step back a little bit and let somebody else have something. So, did you have something? It looked like
I just it's kind of like it kind of ties into what I was saying a second ago, but it's kind of like a little breakdown of like examples of toxic masculinity versus healthy masculinity.
Okay, give me a couple. Hit me.
You have toxic masculinity, we kind of touched on, would be dominance over others, whereas healthy masculinity is leadership through respect, which is, we kind of touched on that.
Right.
Also, this one is I like this one because it definitely hits home with me. Emotional suppression versus emotional regulation. So toxic masculinity is you're just suppressing them instead of really, whereas a more healthy view of masculinity would be, recognizing your emotions and trying to, I guess, regulate them as opposed to just saying, pushing them down, which I tend to do a lot,
Damn it. Emotional regulation. All right. I want to say that was in Christine Webb too, in The Arrogant Ape. She was talking about emotional regulation in there.
Yeah.
But that also triggered something that was in a different book that I picked up. You know what I realized? That my style of reading right now has been really heavily influenced by 20 years on the internet, because in the same way that I'll have a browser open with like 12 tabs, I have like, 7 or 8 books that I'm reading.
Right.
Right. And something that I saw in The Arrogant Ape made me pick up Matthew Crawford's book, The World Beyond Your Head. And, I kind of, Matthew Crawford is another one of those philosophers that came into my life because it resonated with something that I had read when I was 17 or 18. I forget. It was right around that time that when in between dropping out of high school and joining the Army, when I read the 2 books that stand out in my mind were If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him, and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And Crawford wrote a book called Shop Class is Soulcraft, which was like a dovetail joint for, in my mind at least, for Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because both of them talk about like craft and being immersed in it, and that's when where the split between me and what I'm doing goes away, and it's just I'm in the moment, so to speak. But at any rate, that turned me on to, got me interested in Matthew Crawford. And then I saw the book, The World Beyond Your Head. And in that book, he's talking about the need for silence, like quiet space to think, right? And that got me on the internet, and we're constantly, whether it's our phone constantly hitting us with alerts, or whether it's, we're on our laptops or iPads or whatever, constantly new, all this new information coming in all the time. And you never have time to think about it. Like, what does this mean to me? And then I got that, like, led me back around to this, like, toxic masculinity and these rabbit holes that these guys get sucked down. And the one young guy that I mentioned, in fact, when you came down to see me, we watched it on YouTube. I showed you who I was talking about. He's like 24 years old or something like that, and already a presence on CNN, and all this kind of stuff. But he's been, talking a lot about that, getting drawn, like watching the pipeline and how these guys get drawn down there. But he doesn't seem to have an answer. At least not yet, but I haven't really done a deep dive, because what I'm starting to do now, as I'm approaching the end of the therapeutic process, thank God, is I'll either, go into my news, Google, whatever, and read a few things, or maybe watch a couple of, YouTube videos from the people that I follow, until I start to feel like there's like this conversation going on in my head where, like, one video is arguing with a different one. And then I realize, okay, well, too much. I got to shut it all down. And then I just, I turn everything off, close the iPad, put it away, and then, sit with the cats or go sit outside.
Yeah.
And just watch the world go by for a bit.
I actually do that a lot. I've definitely mentioned it in our conversations, maybe not on the podcast, but like just not putting on something when I'm in my car, for example, just to give myself time to think. I also find, the funny thing about, like, there was a book that you have you have a lot of books, but there was a specific one. It was, I don't remember it exactly. I read it, but I don't really remember it. But it was The Myth of the Left-Wing Media.
What liberal media?
Right.
That's the book. Eric Alterman.
Right. Because there's this way that they always, especially people on the right, they always paint the media as it's really liberal and it's really like left and all that stuff. But I've never actually found that to actually be true in my own personal experience, because I consider myself very left-leaning.
You're a terrorist,
I basically damn near, as well, that's what they think.
Well, that's the executive order.
Right. Yeah. But the thing is it's always right-wing stuff. Like, no matter how liberal Facebook thinks I am or how left-leaning these algorithms think I am, they continue to try to force feed this red pill stuff down my throat all the time. And it's really annoying. Like, I used to fall asleep to just playing some YouTube video, and it, whatever, something maybe like left-leaning that I might have been interested in. And then it's like I'd fall asleep and, YouTube just keeps playing. And then, like, next thing I know, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, the TV's on, and it's some like crazy right-wing conspiracy or some Anunnaki, or like it's just like lizard people. I don't even know. It's crazy. It's like they're trying to force feed it. And there was this last thing in these differences between toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity that brought something else that I see a lot. It says toxic masculinity is fear of vulnerability. Healthy masculinity is the confidence to be open, right? And the reason why I say I see this all the time on TikTok, where it's like, the reason why men don't open up to women is because later on down the line, they're going to take that vulnerability and throw it in your face and bring it back up. And it's like, first of all, everybody does. I think people do that all the time, not just women. But it's like that I guess it's like, and you get all these men being like, yeah, that's why it's better to just be alone. And it's like they're all agreeing with it. And it's like, this it's constantly there, always trying to pull you into this toxic masculinity. And because I guess, I've been loved my whole life and whatever, I get how I do understand logically, like how someone can get pulled into that. Because maybe you had a girlfriend and you felt like you were being vulnerable and you opened up to her. And then later on in the relationship, she threw it back in your face. And now it's like you use that as like an excuse to just be, disrespectful to women or to, treat them like objects or whatever it is that you end up trying to.
Well, if you've been hurt,
yeah.
And you react against that hurt, right? And if you can't process it, if you don't have a way to heal it, and to recognize that maybe it wasn't you, it's not your fault. One of the things that it was always a struggle for me, and and I don't claim that this is a universal truth or anything, but my experience had been that, well, even I can go back to when I was a teenager, like 15, 16 years old, and I might be at the bowling alley, having like something to eat with my mom and dad after bowling, and I'd be listening, and then maybe dad would head off to the bar, to go have a beer with the guys, and the women would still be sitting there talking. And I would go into the bar, but that whatever, and I would wander back out because they didn't want boys like hanging in the bar, whatever. So be sitting there, and I'd be listening to these women, and they would be like complaining about things that their husbands did, that they weren't attentive, they didn't do, blah 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 blah, right? And so I'm a young boy. I'm thinking, okay, I want to position myself, to have women like me, and didn't do very good at it at first, but I found that a lot of the things that they would complain about to each other, like as women, when a man would try to actually be that thing that they said that they weren't getting, the women didn't know how to behave with a man that actually acted that way. And so since you're not behaving in the model of a man that they have, they don't know how to react to you. And maybe this is what sends some of these guys down the...
That's one of the things that like I think gets brought up, but it seems to also get lost in, is that toxic masculinity. Like it's the same thing. You don't have to be a man to be toxic. Like women are affected by this too, like women.
Well, yeah.
Cause it's like, there are women that they almost expect the man to be toxically masculine. And if he's not, then they don't know how to react. So it's affecting all of us, men or women, and it's just like the same way, the human supremacy and all that gets baked into your brain.
Well, now we circle back around to like the voice of mother culture and those stories that are just circulating around all the time.
Right.
And if you're in a bubble or a chamber, an echo chamber of some kind online, whatever it is, that becomes your reality.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get out of it. So, one of the things that I struggled with for a lot in my life was because you hear, well, I grew up, I've been a feminist, pretty much my whole life because I heard about, equal rights for women. I was like, yeah, absolutely. That's a good thing, and And so I've always been sympathetic to, feminism as a general rule, not the militant feminism, not the man bashing feminism, but hey, we're people, we're equal, we have our strengths and weaknesses just like you, like, can we get along? And I've always been a fan of that. But then one of the things is that you get into this thing where, okay, you've got the feminist critique of traditional masculinity as being oppressive and all this stuff. And so, okay, well, what am I supposed to be? And there's nothing out there for you, right? There's nothing that says, okay, this way of being a man is toxic to us women as a general rule. And we want something different. Okay, what do you want? No, nothing coming out of it. And so men are out there floating around. And, I'm 69 years old now, but back when I was in my 30s, this was when I started, like trying to figure this out, because I'd been through several relationships by this point and none of them had worked out. And I knew that I was screwing up. So I needed to do something. I was talking about how, like, when I was in my 30s and I'd been through a few relationships that had failed, and I was like, okay, I'm not there's something's off here. I'm not making the connections that I need to make. And so, I'm out there and I'm looking at, like, I'm out there in the self-help books, and these are in the days of the malls when they used to have Walden books and stuff in the mall, and it's like, okay, well, what books are there for, like, men to kind of get centered in themselves so that they can be like a man, like, what is it that about? And around that time there was this they call it a mythopoetic men's movement. It was Robert Bly and Iron John and Drum Circles and the hero's journey with antlers, and they'd go in these things, you'd run around with like antlers on your head, just crazy stuff. But that was all that was available, but that didn't speak to me. Like, that kind of stuff didn't reach my heart. The stuff that would, like, speak to my heart, like, I would feel like an emotional resonance with, I would be looking at the book, and then I would flip around and maybe go to the back of the book or about the author, and I'd find out that it was a book written by a woman for other women. So it was like community and building relationships and being vulnerable and stuff like that. So that was, like, what do? You're a man, you're trying to find ways to relate to the world, and yet all of the so-called male spirituality is, this beat the drum and be that man in that very, stereotypical way. And then before we started recording, I showed you, like, I have the meditation app, right?
Yeah.
And here now, mindfulness is being preached all over the place. Men, women, we all need to do this. And so I have the Insight Timer app is what I use for my meditation. And obviously they must have upgraded it over the last couple of days, because when I launched it this morning, there's all these little tiles across with all these specialized things for parents, for women, nothing for men. So how does a man today, how does a young man today, I mean, I'm on my way out, and you're safely ensconced in midlife, but what about young men? What about, your fiance's, 10-year-old son? How does what is his definition of a man in this world, and where is he going to get it from?
Yeah, I kind of think that's part of the reason why the red pill stuff is so alluring, is because it's like, just the left in general has a problem with messaging, as far as, like, it's like you say toxic masculinity is bad, right? But then what's the alternative? I think a lot of this stuff, because there are people that are talking about the alternative, but I think just within our internet age and all this stuff, it's just that the loudest voices get magnified the most. And so it's like, yeah, there's people that are, I'm sure if you really dig deep enough, but it's just like what is fed to you by the algorithm is just like toxic masculinity bad. Now you have these red pill people that are like, here's a, it's almost like, forget all those people, like all those people that are telling you that being a man is bad. It's not bad. It's good. It's great that you're a man. And then so that's why it's alluring, because it's like you're not offering an alternative on the other side.
I mean, you're more tuned into the media environment than I am just because of the age difference. Do you think do you feel like there's any space online anywhere for men that isn't performative or toxic?
I don't know. It seems mostly toxic, and I guess.
Well, when you see men online that aren't doing performative, masculinity, do you pay attention to them?
I don't know. What do you mean? Like, what would be an example of something?
Just a podcast host, a male podcast host or YouTuber that presents things in a way that is, in your mind, is masculine without being like that over the top toxic kind of.
Well, I think that's most of the stuff I listen to.
Well, there you go. So it's out there.
It's out there because, like, I don't think, like, I don't know, like, one of my favorite YouTubers, Cody Johnston, he's more, but he, he's not, like, toxically masculine. I love watching his stuff,
He's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Warbo.
Yeah. But, so it's there are people out there that are not preaching this toxic, and and I don't think he seems like a man to me. There's nothing like not manly about him. I mean, he has his beard. Of course, he's a man. But yeah, there's stuff out there, but once again, it's like these loud voices, and especially when you're an impressionable younger person, you don't have as much experience in the world. It's like I said, I hear it and I get it. It's like, yeah, I mean, has a woman in the past take something that I said to her in a moment of vulnerability and used it against me in a later argument? Yeah. But like at the same time, I didn't take that experience and apply it to every single woman, because it's just not how life works. It's not how people work.
The thing is about relationships, though, is anytime you share something, it's going to come back at some point. It's just the way it is. I think, well, when we're angry, we're caught up in the moment, and things are, and yeah, anything that you can reach back and throw at the moment is coming,
right.
Now you try to avoid those. Hopefully, as you're developing your relationship, you're noticing the signs when things are starting to go bad, when you're going to get to that point where you're going to start reaching into the past. Oh, remember 3 years ago when you said, hopefully you can, as you develop in a relationship, you realize earlier and earlier when a conversation is we're starting to not be on the same page here.
Yeah, and for me, what seems to work kind of goes back to what you said about the just stopping and thinking, because a lot of times it's like with, me and my fiance, it's like I'll start feeling like, okay, we're about to get into like an argument or a disagreement, and I'm starting to get angry, and yeah, I might start doing stuff. Like I might just start saying stuff just to hurt you, where it's like, all right, you know what? Let's just take a break. I'm gonna go upstairs to the living room, whatever. I'm gonna go somewhere else and I'm gonna sit. You can sit, and I'm just gonna think. Because a lot of times, what that allows me to do is it's for me personally is like, okay, what's making me upset? Should I be upset about this? Or is this just whether it's a trauma or trigger, whatever it is it something that like I should be getting upset about?
Is this happening now, or does this remind me of something that happened 10 years ago or
Kind
whatever?
of, yeah. And then a lot of times when I take that step back and I look, it's like, you know what? Like, me getting upset about this really isn't probably good, or it is just, it reminds me of what my ex did or something, or whatever. It just, yeah. So it's like, I found just taking that step back before I get over the threshold where I'm about to start saying stuff that I might regret. I like rather just take a step back and kind of regroup, so to speak, and just, because a lot of times I am getting mad at stuff. Even, and this is not even just in excuse me, just getting over a cold. This is not even just in my romantic relationship, just even, my work relationship. Sometimes it's like I get upset, I've been finding, I've been coming to the realization lately at the ripe old age of 44 that like one of my biggest reasons why I get upset with just people in general is because they're not doing it the way I would do it. That's really the only thing, it's like I asked, can you do this for me or whatever, or it's just that other person whose job is connected to mine, to where when they do their job, that connects to my job. It's like, if I was doing that job, I wouldn't have done it that way. And that upsets me. And what I'm finding is, if I take a step back and realize, you know what, not everybody's me. My way might not necessarily be the best way. It's just the way I think about it. It allows me to take a step back and try to like not be as upset with people just because they're not like me.
So did you figure that out on your own just by like experience, like tripping over yourself? Or was that something that you picked up, like you read a book by somebody or a magazine article or somebody told you?
I think it was more just, I think just one day I just decided to ask myself, why is this upsetting me? Because I used to just get mad. I mean, I've been known at various jobs for, being like, I'm very, very calm until you piss me off. And then it's like, but
Gee, I wonder where you got that from.
But yeah, I think what ended up, it was really just me. I came to a point in my life where, I don't want to be angry all the time. And the only person that can stop me from being angry is me. Because it's like the stuff that pisses me off, like whether I'm mad or not, it's not going to change it. Like when I get stuck in traffic coming home from work, what does it matter? If I'm angry at it or not, I'm still stuck in traffic. It don't matter. And I know the reason why I'm stuck in traffic is because everyone's getting off work at the same time. And yes, and people are not paying attention, and they're crashing and they're rear-ending, and especially in New York, it's like almost every day there's somebody rear-ending somebody. You know, I mean, just as a matter of fact, right before this podcast, I had went out to run some errands and I got stuck in traffic on the street to my apartment because somebody rear-ended somebody up here. And it's like, okay. Yeah, so yeah, we've been going for about an hour now.
Oh, no kidding.
So I guess
that went fast.
I guess we could start wrapping it up. Do you have any last thoughts or anything?
Well, actually, we're on this thing of, I mean, we brought up like this idea of toxic masculinity and this seeming inability of the progressive left to come up with a message, that will appeal to young men, that will allow them to be male and a man without necessarily having to, run down into this toxic, destructive, domineering kind of way. And I came across, now this is somebody that, again, when I am in the bookstores and I've picked up books, I've looked at the work of this person and was like, do I need to read this now? No, maybe sometime in the future. But because I was on this, a quote from a Bell Hooks came up. And apparently, she says that the first act of love for men is to reclaim their capacity to feel. That's such a simple, radical thing. And yet, 40 years later, it's still not mainstream. Why do you think that is? She said it, she wrote it 40 years ago, that the first act of love for men is to reclaim their capacity to feel, just to feel anything. 40 years later, it's still not mainstream. So we appreciate the comments that do come our way. So anybody got an answer for that?
Yeah.
We'd appreciate your view.
Right.
But anyway, I'm Doug.
And I'm Mark, and this has been occasionally philosophical.
We like to think. Thanks for joining us.